we're live. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. The third and final night. I promised you excitement tonight. Fireworks, exploding rockets, landing on the moon, suspense, all of that. So we're in for a treat tonight. Now, I should say that some of you have noticed I've got my little camera sitting here. I'm live streaming it to my Facebook page as we speak, and then when I get home, I'll take that and switch it over to YouTube so that everybody can grab that. But if you want to take notes at the beginning, I'll mention it again at the end. I'll give you 3 web addresses that can help you. First is my main website, ShawnTheBaptist.org. Don't laugh at that. John the Baptist is my principal patron because Shawn is Irish for John. So John is my name, kind of, and so which one? And I chose John the Baptist. So I am Shawn the Baptist, SHAWN thebaptist.org. I make no money, although thank you very much for your donations. I will use that to pay for my $400 something Mevo camera that I bought to stream this, so thank you. We'll see. So ShawnTheBaptist.org. My homilies are there. You can subscribe to my podcast, things like that. Also, YouTube, which is where I will put these videos if you don't have Facebook. So youtube.com/ShawnTheBaptist video. Okay, you got to put the video on the end because there's a guy named Shawn who is a Baptist who took Shawn the Baptist and ShawnTheBaptist.com. I talked with this guy, he would not give it to me, even though he doesn't use it. So I am ShawnTheBaptist.org, and my YouTube page is Shawn the Baptist Video. Okay? Finally, if you do want to watch it on Facebook, you can follow me on Facebook. I kind of don't friend people who aren't like people that I'm friends with, that I actually know. So just, you know, that these videos are public. So you can go to Father Shawn Tunink on Facebook, Tunink, and you'll find the videos out there as well. Okay, that's a little bit of the multimedia electronic beginning. This is a technical talk, so we got technical things. Hey, we got 2 people watching us online. See, look at that. All right. I will say that the video quality on night 1 on the YouTube is a little bit less because I forgot to put the little memory card in there that I could grab it with higher. So the second night's in HD, and tonight will be in HD. So there you go. All right. Well, why don't we begin with a prayer then? In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Dear Jesus, we thank you for these 3 nights that we have had together here as we seek to grow closer to you this Lent, to gain inspiration. We have so much inspiration in the gift of your cross as we look upon it tonight and the beautiful gift of the Eucharist. But we know too that as human beings, we find inspiration in the created world and the technological abilities that you have given us. And so we thank you tonight for the gift of everyone in the space program, the leaders that made that possible, that set visions. We pray that as we hear about the great mission and accomplishments of the moon landings, that we would be inspired ourselves to strive for heaven. We ask you to bless this talk and all present tonight. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, so to recap, the first night we asked the question, where? Where are we going? And the importance of setting a destination, setting a mission. And of course, that was President John F. Kennedy, who said in that famous speech to Congress, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before the decade is out of landing a man safely on the moon and returning him home. And with that, he set the mission. Later saying at Rice University, we choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade, as I pointed out the other night. He actually said decade. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. I don't know why it says decade. Does anyone say that? But he does. And do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. It is hard to go to the moon. It is also hard to get to heaven, Jesus tells us. So we're hoping that by learning how we got to the moon, preview of tonight's talk, we might better understand some of the ways that we might get to heaven. So where? We're going to the moon by the end of the decade, 1969. We got to 1968 last night. Tonight we're going to get all the way. Second talk was why. A little bit philosophical last night. What does it all mean? We talked about 4 causes of Aristotle, how things are made of stuff, the material cause. The stuff is formed into something which we call the formal cause. It's done by somebody, something we call the efficient cause. And then the final cause, number 4, is called the final cause. And it's answering the question, why? Why does something exist? Why go to the moon? John Kennedy would also say at Rice University, why climb the highest mountain? Why sail the seas? Why does Rice play Texas? He was at Rice University, and he's trying to give examples of things that are hard. So Rice being a smaller university, you got it, football. Okay, so why? Why go to the moon? We talked about some of the things we learned going to the moon, and that's great. But the bigger question is, as we saw last night, we get all the way to the moon thinking that's what we wanted to do. That's our goal. Why? Or we're going to the moon. And what do we discover when we get to the moon? Earth. First time ever, man looks back and sees all of Earth at once, and we are astounded at how fragile and small we look. And on that famous Christmas Eve, 1968, we see that they read from the book of Genesis on their TV broadcast. Not only did they find the moon, they found Earth and found God even on the trip to the moon. The 2 last things they did not expect to find. They expected to find the moon, and while looking for the moon, they were amazed to find Earth and God. As we go about looking for what we think our goal is, we might just be surprised that the why of what we're doing isn't what we thought it was at all. God might actually have some kind of other plan. And I entreat you that when you go to ShawnTheBaptist.org, you will find that my homily from this last weekend is in fact called Unplanned. And it's all about what God does with our plans and then when things go unplanned and how that's not necessarily a bad thing, as we saw even with Apollo 8. Now, tonight, the talk is entitled, How? How did we do it? How did we get to the moon? Now, I was surprised. The first night when I talked with people, there are a lot of people here who have some real technical knowledge. I think I talked to one person who even worked on rocket fuels and things, so we actually might have some rocket scientists here for all I know, so that's pretty impressive. So in order to speak to some of the people of the more technical sort of mind, we're going to talk a little detail about how. We're going to talk about the Saturn V rocket and the command module, the service module, and the lunar module, and you're going to know a little bit more probably about how we got to the moon, unless you're that rocket science person, and if that's you, just be quiet in case I mess something up. Because I'm not a rocket scientist. Okay, so let's start with a little bit about, I'll just give you an overview of the whole shebang of what it was like to launch the Saturn V rocket, go to the moon, and come back. Okay, so this is the technical version of how. So the Saturn V rocket, which you see in your picture there, that is actually the liftoff of Apollo 11. That is actually Apollo 11 lifting off. Now, the Saturn V rocket, as I mentioned last night, is a rocket in 3 stages. There are actually 3 rockets stacked on top of each other with a little ring holding the first 2 apart. On the bottom of each of those rockets, so the first stage is 3/4 of the entire weight of the entire Saturn V rocket. What do you think weighs it down so much? Fuel. That's right. that's a heavy piece of thing that they made there. It's 363 feet tall. To this day, the Saturn V rocket is the biggest, most powerful rocket we have ever built. Think about that, even with everything that we've done. Now we're working on some stuff to go to Mars, but we had to create this because we've got not just a dinky little Sputnik we're gonna launch. We're gonna launch 3 people, a capsule to go to the moon, something to land on the moon, and all the fuel and water that they need to get there and back. That's a lot of weight. Weight equals bucks and fuel in rocketry. So that first stage of the rocket holds a ton of fuel, and it has 5 F1 Rocketdyne engines. These, just one F1 engine. These are the kind of things that are bigger than even what we use to launch like the Mercury. We just one of those to launch Alan Shepard and John Glenn. We got 5 huge engines on the bottom of this. I can stand up inside the bell of one of these engines. We got 5 of those on the bottom of the first stage. Those light off. You're seeing that right now, where there's that big cloud underneath. This is, rocket fuel is a little different. You've got a propellant and an oxidizer, because it's not like burning kind of, you don't have oxygen in space. Spoiler alert. So you gotta provide your own oxygen for the combustion reaction to happen. So there's an oxidizer, it meets liquid fuel, and the reaction takes place by the laws of thermodynamics, the law of inertia. If you eject a bunch of rocket fuel really fast out the backside of the rocket, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So as huge amounts of force are leaving to the Earth, that's going to cause an opposite reaction, forcing the rocket up. Now, it actually took 12 seconds from the time that the engines ignite until it clears the tower. And this is the most dangerous part of the whole thing, because if the engines fail when it's just a couple feet off the pad, it's just going to collapse and the whole thing is going to explode. I should say that at the very, very tip top of the rocket, there is a little pointy thing. The little pointy thing is the launch escape system. It is itself kind of another rocket. It's a solid rocket that when they light that off, it literally sucks the, it doesn't suck it. It takes the little rocket lights up and it rips the command module and everything off the top of the rocket and theoretically takes it over to safety where it can parachute safely down. That's the launch escape system in case something goes wrong. But if something goes wrong with that first stage while it's still not cleared the tower, it's a bad day. So that's the nervous part where they're at right now. After it clears the tower, that first stage burns for, I think, like a minute and a half, 2 minutes maybe, to get it going. And now you've dumped 3/4 of the weight of the rocket. So you're going to accelerate because you've got less mass, E equals mc squared, sort of thing. Force equals mass times acceleration. You got some physics there. Okay, so you got less mass. So same amount of force equals more acceleration. So you go faster and faster. And then I said it's a multi-stage rocket. Eventually you run out of fuel in the first stage. You don't want to carry all that extra weight around. So it actually separates and just falls back to Earth and crashes into the ocean. Now you've got the second stage, which is right about at you can see the little black marking on the first stage where there's the white space in between the 2 sets of black markings. That's where the second stage is. There's a little ring that sits on top of the first stage so that the engines of the second stage can fit in there and they don't all smash together and nothing gets hurt. So when you lose the first stage, it falls back to Earth, and there's some great pictures of this happening. Then you dump the ring. So there are some incredible pictures. If you see NASA pictures of like a ring that's like burning with fire, falling away, that's the little ring that couples the first and the second stages together, that protects the engines of the second stage. So that's why you see sometimes a metal ring falling away. Then the 4 J engines in the J1 engines in the the second stage kick in. They're a little smaller engine. There are 4 of them. Because we're higher, we weigh less, so we don't need as much engine. That pushes it up, ultimately, into low Earth orbit and dumps the second stage. The third stage fires up and gets it all the way up to where we want it to be. And at that point, the second stage falls away, it too crashes back, and you've got the rocket and the third stage shuts down, and you are now in low Earth orbit. You've got the third stage still attached, and you make a couple trips around the Earth to check everything out, make sure everything's okay, and if everything looks good, you will then be ready to burn that third stage one more time to do what is called the trans-lunar injection, TLI. So if you're watching a NASA movie and you hear them, Apollo, you are go for TLI. You can say to your kids, that's trans-lunar injection. You know, and sound really cool. What that means, trans means across, lunar is the moon, injection means we're injecting ourselves onto that path. Because you're in orbit, so you will stay in orbit unless you apply some more force to get yourself out of that orbit. So when we're lined up appropriately to shoot for the moon, you engage that third stage again to make you go so fast that you in fact are able to reach what is known as escape velocity and leave the Earth's gravitational pull, and you are coasting towards the moon. At that point, when you're up to the speed you need to be, you no longer need the third stage. So before you dump the third stage, there's the little kind of teepee looking part on top of the third stage. This is where the lunar module lives. So if you've seen the lunar module, it's that spidery looking thing that's got like 4 little pads that go out, and it looks like a box almost, and it looks like it's made of, like tin foil. It is. It's basically made of foil. You're gonna go to the moon in something made of foil? Well, good thing about being in space is there's no atmosphere, so there's nothing to crash into. There's no drag or air resistance. So you don't have to worry about making something sleek and sturdy like an airplane. Whatever you got, point it towards the moon and it's gonna go, and there's nothing to resist it. So what they actually do is they open up those panels on top of the third stage in what's called the lunar module adapter, and the command module with the service module, they detach, and then they do what is known as docking. On the top of that cone thing where the astronauts are is a probe. It sticks out on top. They detach, fly around, turn 180 degrees, and that probe is going to insert in the top of the lunar module that's sitting on top of the third stage, so that you've now got the lunar module here, and you've got the command module here, and they're flying together, and that probe inserts, and they dock. And you've got capture, and then they back away, and now you've got the lunar module, the service module, and the command module all linked up together, and at that point, you no longer need the third stage. So most of the time, for the early missions, they directed it toward the sun, so it would go into solar orbit. Towards the later ones, they directed that third stage towards the moon, so that it would, in fact, crash into the moon. And they think they've found some of the locations where the third stages have crashed into the moon. At that point, you have your one engine, and you are on your path towards the moon. And as we talked with Apollo 8 last night, when you get to the moon, just as we had to speed up to leave Earth orbit, you gotta slow down to enter lunar orbit. So when you get ready to enter lunar orbit, you burn that one little engine you've got. It slows you down so that the moon's gravity captures you. And now you're going to go into lunar orbit. At first, it's elliptical. You might need to burn again to kind of adjust your orbit altitude. You get that where you want it, and now you're orbiting the moon. At this point, you're gonna move the 2 astronauts that are going to go to the moon are going to crawl through that little tunnel where the probe was. You actually take the probe out and stow it. So now there's a tunnel between the command module and between the lunar module. So now the two astronauts that are going to be in the lunar module make their way through the tunnel, and then they seal the hatch in between, and then they separate. So notice there are 3 Apollo astronauts. Only 2 of them actually go to the moon. So we know that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are the first 2 astronauts to actually land on the moon. Everyone forgets about poor Michael Collins, who stays up in the command service module, circling the moon. They describe him at that time being the loneliest human being in the world, because he is completely isolated from every other human being. I don't know. I do 30-day silent retreat and thing, and that seems pretty isolating. But Michael Collins is up there orbiting the moon, while now you've got your lunar module just by itself with Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and now you want to land. So what do you need to do to land? It's not like a plane where you like point it at the ground and go. There's no atmosphere to the moon. It's all mechanics at this point of physics. If you want to go down, you got to slow down. So they fire the engine. There's a descent engine on the lunar module. They fire that engine to slow down, and they start to sink towards the moon. And they keep slowing down and slowing down. They turn it right side up, and eventually as they settle down onto the moon, they're burning their one engine, trying to make it so that they land nice and soft. There are little probes on the bottom of the pad so that when they hit the moon, a little light will go on, called the contact light, and they will know to shut down the engine, and the lunar module will settle gently onto the moon. At that point, they go through a bunch of checklists to see, can we stay? Are we still alive? Do we have everything we need? And then you could be like, go for stay on the moon. We'll talk a little bit more about what happens then, but eventually you open the door, you get out, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And then you grab what is called the contingency sample. Grab some stuff from the moon quick in case we have to leave right away. You know, because there might be aliens. No, not aliens. We didn't expect to find the man in the moon or green people. What we expected was, if something goes terribly wrong, we want to make sure we didn't go all the way to the moon, step out and say, this is cool, and like, we got to go. Grab some rocks, quick. Okay, so the contingency sample. They actually got to stay for longer than that. You get back in this, and then when you go to leave the moon, the lunar module itself is 2 stages. There's that engine that you fire that landed you. It's a genius the way they designed this, because now the bottom part of the lunar lander becomes the launch pad for the whole upper half has another engine in it. So if you're standing in the lunar module, you've actually got like an engine between the 2 of you, because that's the ascent engine. So when you're ready to leave the moon, the ascent engine fires, and now the top half of the lunar module comes off, the platform that was the lander stays, and you fly just the top part back up into orbit, where Michael Collins is waiting for you, and once again you rendezvous together, and you crawl back through the tunnel, and everyone is safe and sound in the command module, and you head back towards Earth. Eventually you jettison the lunar module. That's why no one has a flown lunar module that's been to the moon. Okay, they don't come home. They get left there, okay, because it's done. It can't survive re-entry. So now you're pointed back towards Earth. So what you've got left, eventually when you get to the Earth, you dump that. So all you've got left then is the little service module and the cone part on the front, the nose cone, that is the command module where the 3 astronauts are. When you're ready to re-enter Earth, you jettison the service module. So all you're left with is that little cone. And if you've been to the Smithsonian or to the Cosmosphere in Hutchinson or someplace, this is the part that comes home. This is the only part of that whole huge Saturn V rocket that goes to the moon and comes back. The command module. It, on its bottom, has known what is a heat shield. Because as you come crashing to the Earth's atmosphere, you create a lot of friction with the molecules in the air, and you fall through a huge fire cloud, basically. So the heat shield is designed as it heats up. It's called ablative because little parts of it actually melt away so that it takes the heat away. When you're finally through most of the atmosphere and you bust out into the lower level of the atmosphere, parachute opens, and then 3 big main parachutes open. They're the little red and white things, if you see in the pictures. And the idea is that you glide gently down, landing in the ocean, where a Navy ship is there to quickly race to your rescue and bring you back home in triumph. That's the whole mission, okay? We'll ask questions about that at the end. Just in case some of you are completely bored out of your mind right now, that was for the technical people, all right? But keep that in mind, because when I talk about the rest of this stuff, it might be helpful to know, like, okay, what part am I talking about? And if you've got technical questions, we can get those at the end. All right, so that's how. We're done. No, there's a lot more to how. I said the Saturn V is the biggest and most complex, really, and highest payload carrying rocket that we have ever designed. We've designed many other rockets before that, leading up to this. I mentioned the Mercury and Gemini missions from last night. And of course, we had a lot of rockets that were designed for defense purposes, so they're called missiles. Difference between a rocket and a missile? Not much. One contains a warhead on the top, and one contains people on the top, or a satellite or something. So rocket is the nice civilian term for a missile. Think about that. You're essentially putting a guy on top of a ballistic missile and shooting it off. And these engines that I talk about essentially is a controlled bomb that we're going to light off, and we hope that we can direct the bomb in a certain direction so that it will be useful and not blow up and kill everybody. That's rocket science there, essentially. Now, we tried to design a rocket many, many times. And if you've ever seen the movie The Right Stuff, first of all, if you haven't, what are you doing? Watch that movie, The Right Stuff, Tom Wolfe, it's incredible. It is the story of the Mercury 7, the Mercury program. And at this time, we're still designing rockets to send the first man into space. And so there's a great scene in there where they're testing the rockets. How we got to the moon, point number 1 of how we got to the moon is failure. Lots and lots and lots and lots of failures. When you're a rocket scientist and you fail, it's big time. I mean, everyone talks about, like, Thomas Edison, inventing the light bulb, and they're all like, oh my goodness, Thomas Edison, he failed 99 times trying to invent the light bulb, and finally he achieved it on his 100th try, and boy, it's good he didn't give up. Well, here's the thing, though, with Thomas Edison and his little light bulb, all right, if he tries it and it doesn't work, it's like, darn it didn't work. Try again after lunch, If you are a rocket scientist and it doesn't work, it is a bomb exploding while you stand there and watch the huge cloud go off in front of your face, thinking of the millions of dollars that were just spent to do that. Meanwhile, neighbors are picking up shrapnel in their backyards. Okay, this is an agonizing thing to watch. If you are a rocket scientist and you fail, you're no different than Thomas Edison, except, they know it in New York when you mess up in Florida, okay? A little bit different than Edison. Rocket science is serious business. But back to the movie. There's a scene where the astronauts, the Mercury 7, are going out to see them testing. They're testing rocket after rocket. It's just, they say that in rocketry that you'll see one, it goes off 4 feet, and then just crashes back down. Boom, big bomb. All the fuel explodes at once instead of controlled. Or then the next one, they're like, here it goes, and it just does nothing. The next one, okay, this time we got it. It goes up, it clears the tower, and it falls back down, and boom, huge cloud. Now we got it. Next one, nothing. Okay, next one, now we've got it. And it takes off, and it's clearing the tower, and it's tipping, and it's flying sideways. It's going to kill a bunch of people, and you have to destroy it from the range officer who presses the destruct button so it doesn't wipe out a whole Florida town. Okay, we'll try again. And they try again, and this time we got it. Nothing's happening. And then the little escape system, little parachute just goes boop, and that's it. Oh, it's so depressing. And then finally, the last one is great because the astronauts are there watching, and they've decided, there's rumors that they want to send chimpanzees into heaven. And so they think into space. They're going to, well, both in this case, if chimpanzees go to heaven. But they're thinking they're ready. They've got it. They've figured it all out. They're going to send a chimpanzee, but they've got one more test. And so they invite the Mercury 7 astronauts out to see their great rocket. And they're watching, and it takes off, and it starts to sink back down and just explodes in a huge cloud. And one of the astronauts turns to the NASA official and says, "Wow, sure is a good thing the chimpanzee wasn't in that one." Rocketry is difficult, and there are lots and lots of failures. Imagine at any time they could have just given up and said, we're never going to do this. But they kept going, and not long after that, Alan Shepard is sitting on top of that rocket this time in his little Mercury capsule, and he's like, all right, let's light this candle, and he becomes the first American in space. They didn't give up. They kept trying, and they failed over and over and over again. So the first answer to how we got to the moon that is non-technical is we failed. We failed a lot. And like I said, the Russians, they hid all their failures. So all we see is, hey, Yuri Gagarin, he's in space. He got back safely, yay. We didn't see all their failures, and they had a bunch of failures too. But we were showing it for everybody to see over and over, failure, failure, failure. It's important to have failures because that's how we learn. And I'll give you one more story. This is the story a little bit earlier of a satellite and why failure sometimes is important. This book I commend to you. It's called Rocket Men. Someone mentioned it to me the other night. It's one of my also favorite books. So this is the story of a little satellite called Corona. My Corona. Not the drink. It's actually the guy who made it named it after his typewriter. For the young people here, a typewriter is what you forget it. Corona was a typewriter. So the point is, this satellite, 1959, so but before the Apollo stuff, we're testing our rockets, and they've launched Sputnik from Russia. Remember Sputnik, it just goes beep, beep, that's all it does. We decide we want to launch a satellite that will take pictures. Now that's a whole different ballgame, because now you not only have to launch something, get it into orbit, you got to get it to somehow take pictures of the Earth, and now how are you going to get that back? Remember I said the Apollo capsule had that heat shield because you burn up on the way back in? You can't just take your camera up there and just drop it back, it'll burn up. So they had to create some kind of a re-entry capsule that would have a heat shield and then a little parachute. And so Corona was supposed to do that. It goes up, orbits like Sputnik, takes pictures of Russia, then it ejects its film canister, which has a special heat shield so it can fall to the Earth, and a little parachute so it falls gently back to Earth, and we go retrieve it. That's how it's supposed to work. Well, here is the history of Corona. January 1959. Launch aborted due to technical errors. February 1959. Launched, but stabilizing system failed, throwing satellite out of orbit, crashing to Earth. Third attempt. Successfully reached orbit, but its ejected film capsule was never found. Fourth, did not reach orbit. Fifth, did not reach orbit. Sixth, ejected capsule never found. 7th, stabilizer failed, fell from orbit. 8th, failed on the pad. 9th, failed on the pad. February 1960, the 10th attempt failed to reach orbit. 11th, lost by tracking stations. 12th, collapsed on the pad. August 10th, 1960, Corona 13, a success, but its capsule was lost at sea. Finally, Corona 14, you get the great triumph. It goes up, it reaches orbit, flies over Russia, takes pictures, ejects its film capsule, it falls to Earth, we find it, we retrieve it, and we've got the pictures. Now, talk about failures. Now, these are smaller rockets than the Saturn V, but still, every time you're building a new little satellite, and you're watching it disappear, explode, lose its guidance, whatever, but they kept going. They didn't quit. Why is that important? Well, imagine if they'd quit on the 13th time. They wouldn't have succeeded. Why is Corona 14 important? Because Corona 14 flew over Russia, took pictures of all their missile bases, and we got those pictures back. Now, remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was what we call the missile gap. United States and Russia are trying to outdo each other in building missiles so that one country doesn't have more than the other. As if after like the first 10, we're not going to be toast anyway. But we actually thought that Russia had about 25,000 intercontinental ballistic missiles that could reach the United States and bomb us. That's what their propaganda was saying. We thought they had about 25,000. So imagine in the Cuban Missile Crisis, if we think Russia is going to launch 25,000 rockets at us, well, we've got to be ready, so we got to build a bunch. Corona 14 gets back. We look at the pictures. It turns out Russia has only 4 ICBMs. Only 4. All of a sudden, all the tension dies down. We're not in near as much danger as we thought. In fact, had Corona 14 not succeeded, the United States and Russia might have obliterated each other in the Cuban Missile Crisis, each thinking that we were incredibly dangerous to each other. Corona 14 saved the world. Little ball about that size named after a typewriter. Imagine if they'd quit. So I think that it's important for us to keep in mind that sometimes failure is the way we get to the goal. How we get to the moon, we fail over and over. I'm a Boy Scout leader. I've been a Boy Scout for 32 years. And especially as an adult, when we train the Boy Scouts, it's always difficult when we get new leaders, because the leadership model in Boy Scouts is that the boys lead and the adults are kind of there to advise. And so the boys are supposed to do their thing, and then oftentimes what happens is the little scouts, we can see that they're not doing it right. They are in trouble. They are going to fail. And new leaders always want to jump in and say, no, hold on. If you do that, this is going to happen. And we have to be like, get back. We actually let the scouts fail. They learn that, if I go camping and I don't bring rain gear, I might actually get wet. And spending one night wet is enough to help you remember the next time I will bring my raincoat. Okay? Or, I was supposed to buy the food for the camp out? I guess I forgot. Yeah. The other 7 boys in your patrol are going to let you not forget the next time. Now, we don't let the scouts fail in catastrophic ways or things like that, but controlled failure is a little bit about how the scouts learn, and it's definitely how NASA learned. Okay, I mentioned the failed Apollo 1 mission that killed 3 astronauts. That was tragic. In fact, it almost killed the whole space program when Apollo 1 had the fire on the pad. But you know what? The astronauts themselves are the ones that testified, went before Congress and said, no, we can't quit. Gus Grissom, who died in that spacecraft, says, if I die, you guys got to keep going. Frank Borman, who was the captain of Apollo 8 that we talked about last night, he went before Congress. They asked him, would you go up in that? It's like, absolutely, we've got to go to the moon. Failure doesn't matter. We've got to keep going. The other big failure is, of course, Apollo 13. Now, that one's a little better in that nobody died, but if you haven't seen that movie, gosh, see the movie. Tom Hanks is my favorite astronaut. Well, Jim Lovell, who he plays. But Apollo 13, they're supposed to go to the moon and land on the moon, just like 11 and 12 did. We got this stuff figured out. We go, we do all this stuff, and just like I described at the beginning, it all happens, you land on the moon. 11 did it, 12 did it. All of a sudden, 13, they're up there fighting for their life because a fuel cell in the service module exploded and blew half of the spaceship out. Well, all of a sudden, it's a rescue mission. And through a lot of ingenuity and work at NASA, they get back. And everybody's safe. And they actually call that a successful failure. Gene Kranz, the flight director in that movie, he has his book on Apollo 13 is called Failure is Not an Option, because he told all the workers in Houston when they saw what had happened, everyone's demoralized. We failed. It's not going to work. Gene Kranz is, no, failure is not an option. Give me solutions. We're going to get them home. And they did. And it was one of the greatest triumphs in NASA, even though the mission seemed to have failed. So a lot of times in our life, the things that seem to go wrong are in fact some of the greatest things that push us forward. Because all of us kind of have our plans, I think, of how we think our life should go. And most of the stress in our life comes when, okay, this is not going the way I wanted it to. This is not what I had in mind. I mean, I had the job I wanted and I just got fired. You know, we're all ready to have kids and we find out that we're struggling with fertility, or one of our kids has a birth defect, and now what? And all of a sudden our plans for what we thought life would look like, it's a lot harder. Or we're raised in a beautiful Catholic family and then all of a sudden our grandkids are leaving the faith. What do I do? The plans go all to kaput. But the good thing is when our plans fail, God still has a plan. He's got the plan. And he'll adjust to wherever we're at and give us the new best plan. In fact, it's precisely when our plans fail and we mess it all up. Number one, we have to turn to God because we feel weak and helpless and I can't do it. That's a great place to be when you call out to God saying, I failed, I can't do it. But that's when grace breaks in. That's when God is able to actually say, okay, new plan, here it is. And of course, your new plan from God is probably better than the plan you had in mind in the first place. You talk to anybody who's gone through all kinds of stuff in life. When they get towards the end of their life, they look back and almost everyone says, I wouldn't change a thing. Because you realize that if that hadn't happened, well, then this wouldn't have happened, and that wouldn't have happened, and then I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't have met my wife unless that person had broken up with me, or whatever it is. All those little failures lead to our ultimate success and happiness. And that's certainly part of how we got to the moon. A bunch of failures that led to ultimate success. So that's the first answer to how. How did we get to the moon? Failure. Lots and lots and lots of failure. But some success, like Apollo 11, like Corona 14. I bet none of you heard of Corona 14 before tonight. Okay, good. I gave you something new. All right, so failure, that's the first how. Second how. For this, I put a little quote from Neil Armstrong there. Most of us are probably more familiar with the shuttle. Pretty reliable. We only lost 2 of them out of over 135 launches. Now that's still a tragedy, but we expect that when the shuttle took off, of course it's going to work. I mean, how many people even would tune in to TV to say, oh, the shuttle's launching today? Like, yeah, it's a shuttle. It's like, the Staten Island ferry. It just goes back and forth, leaves Earth, goes to space, comes back. Happens all the time. It just got very routine, and that's why Challenger was such a thing, and of course Columbia. We thought we had this down. Neil Armstrong. Today, they're shocked when the shuttle doesn't work every time. But we were always surprised when the Saturn V did. Okay, all those rockets exploding on the pad. When was the last time You watched a rocket explode on the pad from Kennedy Space Center. Like never. It doesn't happen anymore. Now, Challenger, of course, exploded in the air, and Columbia ran into a hole in their wing on the way back in. But man, watch that movie, The Right Stuff, where rocket after rocket explodes. That's what those astronauts were willing to get on top of. It was far less safe and secure than the modern shuttle. In fact, the people that work at NASA today say, frankly, if we had to apply our standards today to what was going on at the Apollo time, we never would have landed on the moon. It was far, far too dangerous and unknown what we were doing. We had some incredible, daring people who were willing to make it happen, and as we'll see next, some pretty incredible support team behind it. So the second how. For this, I'll give you another quote by Neil Armstrong there, and I'm going to read it in its entirety because I think it's pretty important. Each of the components of our hardware were designed to certain reliability specifications. And the far majority, to my recollection, had a reliability requirement of 0.99996, which means that you have 4 failures in 100,000 operations. I've been told that if every component met its reliability specification precisely, that a typical Apollo flight would have about 1,000 separate identifiable failures. In fact, we had more like 150 failures per flight, better than the statistical methods would tell you you might have. I can only attribute that to the fact that every guy in the project, every guy at the bench building something, every assembler, every inspector, every guy that's setting up the test, cranking the torque wrench, and so on, is saying, man or woman, if anything goes wrong here, it's not going to be my fault, because my part is going to be better than I have to make it. And that's the only reason we could have pulled this whole thing off. 150 failures. That still sounds like a lot to me. But if they had done it just the way they were supposed to, you'd get 1,000 failures. You can't go to the moon with 1,000 things failing. I mean, imagine if you go to do one of those stages like, okay, let's undock. And that ain't working. Nope. Hey, can somebody jump out real quick and shake it loose? Sorry, not going to the moon. And now you got a big problem. How do you fix all that? 1,000 things go wrong, that can't work. 150, that still seems like a lot. But notice how that happened. Tolerance of 0.00096. That seems incredible. But they did better than that. They did better, each individual person, than what was asked of them. I mean, imagine that you're a little guy, that your whole job at NASA is I make this one little screw. Like, that guy could be like, man, they're going to the moon, I'm just making a screw. All I'm doing. You know, you could get demoralized. But if he did that, even if he made his screw to the tolerance of 0.99996, it still could have failed, and the whole mission falls apart. Maybe somebody gets killed because he didn't do it the best. So what they did was they brought the astronauts around to the factories to meet the workers so they could see the people that were going to be going in the spacecraft they were building. And so everybody that was working did things not just better than expected, but the best possible job they could do. If I'm going to make a screw, I'm going to make the best possible screw I can make, and then I'm going to do it again 100 times if I have to, and it will be perfect. Because someone's going to the moon because of this screw, and it's not going to fail on my watch. That's incredible kind of devotion and concentration and skill and commitment. How many times today do we see people automatically say, all right, what's the least I have to do? I mean, okay, give me the tolerance standard. All right, I could do that, but how far under it can I still be and, still not get fired? Imagine if the people in Apollo did that. We never would have got to the moon. I think there's a great kind of inspiration here to say, we need to be people who do things better than what's expected. Not always going down to the lowest common denominator. Okay, I gotta go to church on Sunday. Maybe I will. Okay, no, I'm super holy, so I'll go to church, but when do I have to get there? I mean, if I get there by the gospel, does that count? I mean, what if I leave, like, right after communion? Does it still count? And those are the good Catholics. I mean, most Catholics are like, I don't need to go to Mass this weekend, there's a game on. I got practice. Got to take the kid to practice. We're not going to Mass. We're always dumbing things down to the lowest common denominator, over and over again. What is the least I have to do to get by? That's kind of how we go through life a lot. And if your goal, if your mission is a lousy mission and you're not inspired by your mission, then yeah, you're just going to keep saying, what does it matter? I'll give it half effort because I don't really care. Everyone in the Apollo program was so inspired by the mission, the where question, that they were willing to put in incredible effort to do the best possible job they could do. Now, that was to go to the moon. Our mission, remember, is to get to heaven. If our mission is to get to heaven, how can that not inspire us to say, I gotta be the best version of myself I can be? I've gotta complete my mission because as Cardinal Newman told us, I've got my mission and nobody else has that mission. So if I fail, the whole mission fails. Does that not inspire us to say, I gotta do my best? I think we as Catholics really gotta lead the way on this. We gotta pull everybody else up. Why is it that the guy could make the screw so perfect? Because he sees the guy next to him who is there until midnight working on his one little bolt. Like, this bolt is gonna go perfectly on your screw, and they are gonna work seamlessly and perfect, and nothing is gonna fail. He's like, yeah. And so the guy making the next thing down the line is like inspired by those two. And so they do better, and everyone does better than they have to do. That's how we gotta be, not, what can I get away with? And what do we do when people sometimes start to get better and start to strive? We try to attack them and pull them down. Who does that guy think he is? Is he holier than thou? Who's he to be going to daily Mass? I know who he is. He shouldn't be going to daily Mass. He's at best welcome at Sunday Mass, but what's he trying to get all holy for? That's what we do when people try to succeed and be the best. I mean, that's like, I'm working on my screw, and the guy with the bolt over there is like, that doesn't matter. This bolt, it'll probably, go on a cup holder in the lunar module maybe. It doesn't matter. There are no cup holders in the lunar module, by the way, nor ashtrays or anything like that. There were a lot of ashtrays in Mission Control, though, let me tell you. Watch those movies. Whew. It's like a smoke cloud in there. No, everybody wants to do the best they can do, and wouldn't it be great if instead of pulling down people who are trying to do better, we all tried to lift each other up and say, you can do it. We can do it. That's what got Apollo 13 home. Gene Kranz comes in, he draws a picture of where they are now. They draw a picture of the Earth. He draws the line and says, that's where we got to get to. Make that happen. And they did. So many times if we set those goals high, we can do it. And not just about us, but about everybody. Back to Cardinal Newman. On that Mission of My Life prayer, he also says, I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for naught. I shall do good. I shall do his work. A link in a chain. Your mission, your mission, your mission. They're all different. But if your mission fails, if your link fails, it jeopardizes the whole thing. If that one little screw is actually the screw that holds the switch, that is the button that's supposed to be pressed to leave the moon, and you didn't get that perfect, what if that's one of the 150 failures that is so just perfect? The button that says, okay, let's leave the moon, not working. You think that's hypothetical? Actually, Apollo 11 leaving the moon, Buzz Aldrin had to jam a pen into the hole of the switch to make it work, to go back. We were like a ballpoint pen away from the alternate speech the president would have given. They wrote two speeches. One that the president actually gave, saying, today, men from the planet Earth landed on the moon. Yay. And they're headed safely home. The other speech was, two great men have given their lives in service of their country, and they will be forever immortalized on the moon. We were a ballpoint pen and a switch away from which speech, are we going to get? 150 failures is still a lot, and it's amazing that no Saturn V rocket ever failed. All of them performed exactly as they're supposed to. Now, Apollo 12 actually got struck by lightning. That was a big problem, but they recovered. You talk about little guys doing their best. I think it's not just the guy with the screw. It's the idea that there are 400,000 people who worked on this project. That's incredible, but it needs every little guy. So especially when we talk about mission, I think sometimes we think that we got to have some huge big mission. Like my life should be about like going to the moon. It should be exciting, and I need something big, and I got to be exceptional and a standout amongst everybody. That's not what I'm talking about. When I mean excellent at what you are supposed to do. And if that means that you are taking care of your kids, and society today doesn't give a hoot about stay-at-home moms or grandmas who take care of their kids, who cares? Do that excellently. If you're the janitor who cleans up the place, do that excellently, because God sees it and you're a link in a chain. Don't think that you have to have some huge mission. This is St. Therese with her little way. Do the little things for God, the little things, and you're part of something great. A link in a chain. So in the end, when we do that, we, as Michael Griffin said, we stretch ourselves, and what it yields broad benefits. Not just tang, not just Velcro. A lot of the people who worked on Apollo worked on Mercury and Gemini, and there's a whole system that was built up, but it's little people. I talked about earlier the youth, how today it seems like 18-year-olds are like playing video games, whereas they were storming the beaches of Normandy in the 40s. The average age of the top engineers at NASA, we're talking the ones in mission control in the room, making the decisions, building the rocket. The average age of a NASA engineer was 24 years old. That's incredible. But you think about it, if you're gonna start a mission to the moon, it's not like you can put out a job wanted poster saying, hey, mission to the moon, engineers needed, must have at least 15 years of lunar travel experience. No, you don't have anybody that's done this before. So what do? You get your best engineers, your best mathematicians, and you're figuring it out. You gotta just figure it out. And they did it. Now, I'll tell you finish here with a little story of the actual landing on the moon and how close some of this was. 150 failures. I talk about the switch leaving, but getting actually down to the surface of the moon. Okay, remember, this is the lunar module, the spidery looking thing. One of them was actually named Spider. And they're going down. This one is Eagle, of course. Columbia is the other cone-shaped piece of it, but Eagle is descending towards the moon. Now, remember I said they plan everything. So they've already targeted exactly where they're going to go. They know exactly where they're going to land. They've scouted it out on Apollo 8 and Apollo 9, Apollo 10. They're ready. And so Neil Armstrong is piloting, but the computer is doing the work. Okay, the computer is guiding things. It's sensing altitude above the moon and what speed you should be at. It's calculating it all. And Neil is there to observe. Buzz is in the right-hand seat. Well, there's no seats, they're standing. But they're looking, computer's doing what it's supposed to, and now they're getting ready to land. Okay, and all of a sudden, Neil looks out the window and he sees their landing site. And it is a boulder field. You could not possibly put the lunar lander down there because it's a bunch of rocks. It's going to tip over sideways. And if your lunar lander tips over sideways, you're not going home. So he does the thing that they had trained for, but no one wanted to have happen. Computer off, going manual, and everyone at NASA is just like, okay, we have no idea what's going to happen. We're just going to call out fuel from now on. And so they're calling out the fuel. Okay, Neil, you've got a minute and a half left. She's flying around. Better find someplace to land. Looking for a place. Okay, Neil, you've got 30 seconds of fuel. Okay. Oh, there's a good spot. All right, we'll start to settle in. Settling. We're just about there. Blue contact light comes on. Buzz Aldrin. Contact light. Shut down. And they're there. Seems simple. 17 seconds of fuel. That's all he had left. 17 more seconds, and Eagle crashes into the moon rather than lands. But Neil Armstrong, cool as a cucumber, he's like, yeah, 17 seconds, it's more than I needed. We're there, who cares? Okay, like I said, today, we'd never get to the moon because we'd never accept something like that. But that's what it took. It took a little bit of challenge, a little bit of trust, and so they get there. And they do it, even with a little bit of risk. It takes being a little crazy. And with that, I'll give you the last quote here. This is actually from Scripture, from Matthew. It says, "A man came up to Jesus, knelt down before him, and said, 'Lord, have pity on my son, who is a lunatic and suffers severely. Often he falls into fire and often into water.'" Now, of course, a lunatic, that comes from the Latin word luna, which means moon. Someone who is a lunatic, we think of being crazy, and they thought that somehow maybe they were under the influence of the moon. So certainly all of us space geeks are somehow under the influence of the moon, I'd say. But then that falling through fire and into water, I couldn't help but think of re-entry to the Earth. The command module falls literally through fire, re-entering, and then into water, into the ocean, where it's retrieved. And so I don't know, maybe this guy that comes up to Jesus, maybe his son was like kind of a closet astronaut back in the day, a lunatic falling through fire and water. All right, let's sum it up. So to recap it all, where? Okay, the journey to heaven is even more exciting than the journey to the moon. We need leaders to show us where we're going, to inspire us. Who are the leaders today that will be like Joshua and Caleb to say, yeah, we can do it. Let's do it. We can take the promised land. God promised it. Let's set big goals, not puny little goals. Let's set big goals. And then who are the leaders that will be like Kennedy to say, we will do it, not because it is easy, because it is hard. We'll do it because heaven is an incredible goal and nothing will stand in our way of achieving it. Where are the new leaders? How well do you know God's story? That's what gave Joshua and Caleb confidence. And are you prepared for the challenge? Will you do it? Then why? The crew of Apollo 8 expected to find the moon. Instead, they found the earth and ultimately God. Can you help not just students, but everyone you meet to find God where perhaps they weren't looking? And finally tonight, how? 400,000 people worked on the Apollo program for that one small step. Do you recognize the importance of your role? Will you do your part? No matter how small it is, no matter how insignificant it is, say to yourself with John Henry Cardinal Newman, I have my mission. God has created me to do him some definite service. I may never know my mission in this life, but I will be told it in the next. I am a link in a chain. I will do my little thing or my big thing as best as I can do it, because failure will not happen because I messed it up. Now, for Christians, of course, the good news is even if our rocket explodes, and sometimes we fail big, God will be like, okay, new rocket, let's keep going. Christian life is a little more forgiving than rocketry. Little epilogue I put on there for you. I read this in the book Rocket Men that I brought to your attention. This is a quote from the early days of the Mercury program when they're picking the first 7 Mercury astronauts. It says, when NASA began looking for astronauts, we spent a long time discussing the psychological requisites necessary for an astronaut. And the result of our discussion was that we ought to look for them among the priests. A young, healthy priest, qualified in engineering, in chemistry, in medicine, in geology, and able to pilot a plane competently. That could be me. I'm a young, healthy priest, qualified in engineering, chemistry, medicine I could learn. You know, how hard is that? Geology, I could pilot a plane. If I had lived at the time of the Mercury program, I could have been one of the first 7 Mercury astronauts. No, of course, ultimately they didn't go with priest at that time. But I think this is sound wisdom that we should revisit. And so you can see there that I took that first picture from night 1. You can go back and compare. Instead of President Kennedy there. Oh, look, it's me. I believe that this nation, I should do it in my voice, it's me. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before the next decade is out of landing a priest on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. Me. Thank you very much. All right, questions. I felt like I lost a lot of you in that technical stuff. People were like, I think somebody left. I'm gonna hope that was not because of my description of the Saturn V, which I thought was pretty impeccable, quite frankly. But yes, okay.
Mid-60s, about 1980, I worked out at the roll call base at TWA, and I've seen, L1011 engines on the stands being tested. But the scale of this thing, this had 5 engines, you say?
5 F1 Rocketdyne engines on the first stage.
I'm kind of curious as to how, I know how the jet engine works, jet engine. What's the basic difference between a rocket engine and a jet?
So a jet, he's asking, what is the basic difference between a rocket engine and a jet engine? I love this. I know you were all going to ask the same thing. So a jet engine is designed to fly in the atmosphere. So the way that it pushes the plane forward is like a big fan, kind of. It sucks in air, so there's a spinning turbine inside a jet engine, an impeller that sucks the air in and then blows it out the back. So we still have our law of inertia a little bit. If you're bringing a lot of air in the front and pushing it out the back, okay, now you're moving forward, and each of those little blades on the turbine is like a wing, like an airfoil that's spinning real fast in the air. So you've got the Bernoulli effect, creating low pressure on the front and high pressure on the back, and the plane moves forward. Notice the operative necessity in all that is air. You're not really using inertia so much as you are literally, the propellers are biting their way through the air. Like I'm grabbing air and I'm pulling, I'm almost like pulling myself through the air. That's how a jet engine works. So for a rocket engine, which is going to have to go where there is no air, you can't be grabbing onto something because there's nothing there. So it works purely by inertia, meaning that you've got a flammable fuel, a liquid fuel. Since you don't have oxygen, you have some kind of an oxidizer. You bring those two together, start the reaction, and now it burns, and the force of it leaving pushes the rocket in the other direction. So there's no grabbing a hold of anything. It's all inertia with spent exhaust from.
What would be a number on the thrust that those 5 engines would produce?
Dang it. A lot. This is what Wikipedia is for. He's asking what would be the thrust of one of those engines. Gosh. I told you I'm going stale on my numbers. I don't remember what the F1 engines produce. You're just gonna have to go to Wikipedia for that one. I used to know this stuff. This is what happens when you get old like me. You forget the thrust of an F1 Rocketdyne engine. I mean, next I'm gonna forget how to go to the bathroom. How do they overcome the G-forces? They could pull sometimes up to 10 Gs, I think. So they've got it designed. In fact, if you see those tests of the Mercury astronauts in the right stuff, that they spin them in like a centrifuge kind of thing to see how much they can withstand. I mean, they put them through all kinds of tests. So they know a human being can only withstand so many G's. And so part of the design of the rocket is we can't accelerate faster than what a human being can survive. So it's built into the engineering. Yeah. Okay, yeah.